So I chose this article, and I use that term loosely, not because of Australia's housing affordability crisis, which is a very real and interesting topic in and of itself, but rather because it represents the preference by the media for narrative over objective, fact-based analysis, coupled with unrealistic expectations of the entitlement generation. Generation rent. What hope does a nurse on 60k have of buying a house? So 60k is not a bad salary, but not great. The Australian Bureau of Statistics puts average weekly earnings at $1,533 before tax, which equates to a yearly salary of almost $80,000. So this guy's earning a quarter less than the average Australian. Or is he? Because we find out in paragraph 5, Damiens takes home around $60,000 a year after tax, $11,000 of which he estimates is spent on rent. So thanks for that misleading title. So if we gross up his after-tax salary, it comes out to almost $79,000 a year, which is very close to the national average. But let's go back to the start. Sydney nurse Damien Davis, 30, considers himself really lucky. In the city's east, where he grew up and now rents, that equates to living in a tiny unit with 4 bedrooms, 5 people, 1 toilet and a cramped kitchen. They rent privately off an old lady for $900 a week, which they split up between them. A score, he says. It's agitating at times, especially after a night shift dealing with aggressive drunks and drug addicts, but he refuses to complain. For me, I've been happy. The place has been great for what I need to do, but it hasn't had the possibility of savings for me. It's been enough for me to live on, to rent, and to enjoy the things that I do in life, but not to save, he says. Now this is where I'm going to take issue with our friend Damien. So we've determined that he's making close to the average wage at almost $79,000 a year, but he pays just $11,000 in rent a year because he's crammed into a house with 4 other people. So Damien is spending just 14% of his income on rent. That's a very, very low proportion. Here's an article from February last year showing that for your average Sydney-sider, approximately 38% of their salary goes on rent. Now, of course, you pay less outside of capital cities, but even in regional areas, your average Australian sees around 20% of their salary go towards rent. So as Damien said, he's really lucky. Of his take-home salary of $1,154, only about $212 goes on rent, leaving him $942 a week in the bank after tax and after the single biggest expense most people have, rent, or if you're a homeowner, a mortgage. How's this guy not saving at least $250 a week, $1,000 a month? He's sharing household bills with 4 other people. He's young, he has no dependents, he looks healthy. There's absolutely no excuse for him not being able to save. In order to save money, he would be required to take lots of extra shifts, meaning spending all your free time at work, which would be exhausting and result in a higher factor of burning out in my profession, he says. Firstly, we've established that's simply not true. Secondly, I have the feeling that if you can't save money given your current circumstances, you'd probably just blow all your overtime pay anyway, because you have no discipline. In 6 years of full-time 40-hour weeks, he's managed to save $6,000. Now, we don't know how long he's been living in his current situation, but if he saved just half of the $250 I said should be possible, $125 a week, he should be able to save $6,000 a year given his current circumstances. He admits he could have saved more if he hadn't taken an annual trip overseas, but no, not so fast. Before we get to the but, this is one of the problems, the problem of expectations. I earn an average wage, but I want to take trips overseas every year and enjoy the things that I do in life and then complain that I can't save. Sorry, mate. You want to save, you have to make sacrifices. And the sad part is, he's already making sacrifices by living with 4 people, which frees up a lot of disposable income. But he hasn't taken advantage of that. You've got no one to blame but yourself for your lack of savings. With house prices in his area averaging $2.1 million or 35 times his annual income, it wouldn't have made much difference. Even unit prices are above $1 million in his area and still well beyond his means as an everyday working class Australian. Well, firstly, it's not 35 times his income. It's 25 times if you use gross salary, which is the standard way of doing it. But he is at least partially right. You live in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. Now, the eastern suburbs is home to about 250,000 people and includes some of the most expensive real estate in the country, such as Point Piper or Watson's Bay or Vaucluse. It also includes less expensive areas like Matraville and Chifley. Now, given that you can buy a unit in Matraville for around $770,000, he's not living in the cheapest area, but probably not living in an area like Point Piper where the average unit costs close to $1.6 million. He might live somewhere like Coogee where the average unit price is just over $1 million. Now, I used to live in Coogee. It's a great place. Beautiful beach, great cafes and shops, if you're into that kind of thing. And you can get to the centre of the Sydney CBD by bus in 25 minutes on a work day if you leave early enough in the morning. So this guy has an average wage but wants to live in one of the most expensive and affluent areas of Sydney. The reality is, mate, you can't afford to buy there. It's that simple. You have to look elsewhere. There are no pockets in Sydney that are affordable anymore, he says, adding that he's also worried about the longevity of his current lease. We're not going to be able to stay here forever, and that's an obvious risk of renting around here if it keeps going through the roof, he says. Well, that's just not true. There are places that would be affordable for someone on your income, but they're not going to be on the beach or as close to the CBD as you would like. You could buy a 2-bedroom apartment in Carramar out in Sydney's west for $350,000. Very affordable for someone on your income at about 4.5 times your income. But I suspect, like a lot of people, you don't want to live and work out in the western suburbs of Sydney. But the reality is you just can't afford to live, or at least buy, where you want to buy. And what's Damiens' proposed solution? Save more? Look at a more affordable area? Nah, of course not. Damien thinks there should be more rights for renters and a cap put on rent in order to protect the many young Australians who are locked out of the housing market. Ah yes, instead of making a realistic assessment of what's possible given your circumstances and taking responsibility, let's get the government involved and put a cap on rents. It's just not fair that rent prices are able to continue to go through the roof, and buying property, Sydney is just not a city where that's possible for people who are not in the ultra-high income earning bracket to afford property, which pushes out the lower and middle class, which is a shame for society, he says. Yeah, mate, if you are a lower class income earner, there is no conceivable way you can afford to buy in the eastern suburbs or anywhere around the CBD. That's just not going to happen, and even middle class income earners will struggle. And again, the eastern suburbs is one of the most sought after areas in the country. And as far as rental prices go, it's got nothing to do with fair. If people are willing to pay those prices, then that's all there is to it. It's called a market, and markets don't care about your feelings. They care about supply and demand. That's it. Now, none of this is to say that Sydney is not expensive. It is. It was recently ranked the second most expensive city in the world. There's also problems with a shortage of housing stock in some areas, unnecessary government red tape around land releases, and skewed incentives towards property investors rather than owner-occupiers. All that is true. But you, my friend, have wildly unrealistic expectations and no discipline when it comes to savings. You're in a unique position to sock away savings, but you don't want to give up your lifestyle and work harder. Well, thems are the choices, Chief. Reap what you sow. And as for you, Jed Smith, try being a little more objective instead of pushing a narrative. We know why you chose to misrepresent what the guy earns, because it's hard to complain about earning $80,000 a year. You had to make it seem like it's tougher than it really is, and then you completely let him off the hook for not saving more. Why? Because it fits the narrative. Well, Jed, we're on to your bullshit. Do better. So do you think I'm being too hard on Damien and Jed, or do they need a reality check? Let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next time.